The biggest hire in Pete Golding's future is offensive coordinator, but the first contestant is going to get a nice tryout this playoff. We'll tell you who in just a second.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Stephen Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in America, maybe the world. Thank you for that. On today's show, we're talking about one of the biggest questions heading into the college football playoff, and that is, who will Pete Golding choose as his offensive coordinator to run his offense, to play call, with Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr. officially off to the hated Baton Rouge. The Rebels still need a steady hand to call plays in the most important game in the program history. The good news, Golding made it clear that the systems and the structures within the systems will remain exactly the same in the postseason. So now the question becomes, who on this staff is best suited to keep the offense humming, maintain continuity, and give the Rebels the best chance to win when everything is on the line? We'll break down the leading candidates and what each side brings to the table. All of this and more on today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Remember, we're free and available in all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Now, this is going to be a stream of consciousness type of episode, and I'm sorry, it's probably not going to be as good as you are used to, but yesterday was a really long day for me, and this was recorded yesterday. So this is the third podcast I've done today. So I do apologize if the energy isn't quite what you've come to expect from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. But to recap what has happened, Lane Kiffin is off to LSU. He tried to burn down Ole Miss. It was definitely a burn the boats type situation at Ole Miss. He was hoping to leave a flaming pile of rubble, jet set off to LSU. He's got a competitive advantage over Ole Miss, yada, yada, yada. Ole Miss and Keith Carter was able to intercept that, figure out what was going on, and figure out the best course of action, which included hiring Pete Golding as the head coach, not the interim head coach, the head coach. If you are interested in any of that stuff, tune into our podcast yesterday, our lives. We talk about the hiring of Pete Golding and what went on. We kind of went back and forth. Some things information-wise changed from one podcast to this podcast. So we're going to talk about the play caller in this offensive podcast. When we did our last show, we thought Charlie Weiss was going to hang around, obviously. Since then, there was obviously a second renegotiation of what went on, and they're going to get some more money. So Charlie Weiss got on the plane and headed down to Baton Rouge. Good for him, yada, yada, yada. Go away. It's going to be fine. So who is going to be the playoff or the playoff play caller for Ole Miss, and who will be the play caller moving forward, and a couple of names that you need to know down the road for people that Pete Golding might hire, because there are assistant coach hirings that will come. We'll talk about all of that today, and I will react to what's going on and where I see different things and what my opinion is on all of that. But first of all, play caller for the playoffs. The best chance for continuity in Ole Miss's offense is with Joe Judge. He has been the head coach of the New York Giants. He's worked on Bill Belichick's staff, which means he knows how to grind, which is a very important thing that they're going to study over the film pretty consistently to try and figure out how to take advantage of what the other team is doing to you. And with Ole Miss's weapons, he has a handle on how they have been used. Listen, both of the quarterbacks at Ole Miss love Joe Judge. They're not going anywhere. Both of the quarterbacks love Pete Golding. They're not going to go anywhere. It's not what it looks like. When you have a situation over the last month that Ole Miss has had, I truly believe, I can't prove it, but I truly believe is this Lane Kiffin gig was done about 3 weeks ago, and this whole thing was about running out the clock, including what he did to Ben Garrett down after the Egg Bowl was to buy 12 hours or so that he can watch Knox unimpeded. That's what that's about. Distraction, distraction, distraction. And while that was going on, you started to see like Joe Judge pop up in the Instagram thing of Trinidad Chambliss and Austin Simmons, to where Joe Judge has been the dude for the quarterbacks and the staff. So it would make sense that he would have a familiarity about what these quarterbacks can do well and what they have struggled with, because Austin Simmons requires a different game than Trinidad Chambliss. They just do. Playing quarterbacks is not a cut and dry situation. Each quarterback is going to have strengths, and they are going to have the game called to those strengths. That's the reason it looks so different when Trinidad plays quarterback than when Austin Simmons played quarterback. But they both seem to really like Joe Judge. Now, I talked with a parent of a player on the team that mentioned that before the Egg Bowl, the players were starting to revolt over what was going on in the locker room. Now, there's going to be some certain players that are very dug in on Lane Kiffin. That's just going to happen. I don't know what it looks like, but you saw Kewan Lacey essentially being wooed the last couple of weeks by Lane Kiffin. That's the reason in post-game you see them walking around together, taking off belts, all of that stuff. That is all a part of the recruiting process. But I don't think that I am under the impression that one of those players that are just in love with Lane Kiffin is Austin Simmons or Trinidad Chambliss. And I think they're much more a Joe Judge player, essentially. So Joe Judge knows exactly how to handle these players and can call games to their strength. He can handle it. He, like I said, he's grinded in the NFL. He's been the head coach of the New York Giants. The only thing that I have questions about is the tempo aspect of this offense. Now, Ole Miss has proven this season their willingness from time to time to go slow. They had 35 minutes of time of possession against the Oklahoma Sooners, and they had 38 minutes of time of possession against the South Carolina Gamecocks. They can go slow when they need to. So the question becomes, I think Joe Judge is going to be the primary play caller for Ole Miss for this playoff run, but how does it look? Because you can slow it down and not change the system or the structure. They're going to go fast at times. They're going to go slow at times. What is comfortable for Joe Judge? I think he can call the plays. The plays are the plays whenever you're trying to take advantage of what's going on. All of these guys have sat in meetings for multiple years. So that can happen. If you're trying to take advantage of a free safety coming down, you're probably running a concept that'll force the free safety to come down and beat him over the top. It's a simple thing for play callers, and we'll talk with Corey Burton, who is going to help us out. He actually does Locked On Vandy as well, but he's going to help out Locked On Ole Miss with some extra stuff doing anatomy of the play and talking about play calling. And he can really look at what needs to be done and how it happens and all the idiosyncrasies of calling plays. I think Joe Judge is in position to essentially try out for the offensive coordinator position. I get that he's been a head coach in the NFL, but if he goes and does really well in these playoff games and builds a little momentum, obviously he would have the ability to stay in Oxford, Mississippi. If not, I got a couple of more names that I'm thinking about from time to time. We'll talk about that in just a second. But first, I need to let you know that this hire is going to be massively important for Pete Golding. Whenever a defensive head coach takes a job, the most important thing they can do is nail the offensive coordinator hire. So we talk about Joe Judge getting a tryout essentially in the playoff to what will it look like long term? Both things are going to be massively important for Ole Miss. We saw with LSU this year how the scheme can make the offense look clunky. It's not the offense that the guy that went to Notre Dame did with Jaden Daniels and all that when they were breaking records. No, it was the same plays, but the way they were called and all of that stuff, it was just problems. So the offensive coordinator is going to be a massive hire for Pete Golding moving forward. And we'll tell you a little bit about that next. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994. And with 48 teams, for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That is why Game Time is clutch, finally giving the fans real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can trick your package price drops in real time and get alerts when great seats open. The buy tickets that feature is the moment that they hit the app. You can use that as well. It puts the power back in your hands and it makes the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You pull up the app and the layout makes it so simple to scroll through all of the matchups and compare the seats. So pick a game, tap a section, and you'll have your tickets locked in within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for fine print. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets, every match, concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Do us a favor, like, subscribe, and comment on the video. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcast you're listening to and give it a 5-star review. It costs absolutely nothing, but it helps keep all of this free. Locked On is getting ready to change the game yet again, all in the name of having fun following your team. It's coming in December. It's coming in about a week. We'll tell you more about that as well. And thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast in America. That's all on you. Thank you very much. All right. So one interesting thing that I'm dealing with right now is we talked about it in the first segment just a little bit, that Pete Golding needs to nail the offensive coordinator hire. And with Ole Miss offensively, you don't want to change the system too much long term, okay? With Ole Miss going as fast as they've gone over the last 6 years, there has to be some similarities in what's going on. Because if you go from what Ole Miss has been doing for the last 6 years to what, I don't know, Baylor did with running powers and I formation and going under center, it would be clunky and it wouldn't be a fit. What Derek Mason did at Vandy was change the system up entirely over what James Franklin did, and it just didn't work. So it's going to be important to where at least the system and the structure kind of stays consistent. You don't want a system to be completely off kilter to where it just throws everything out of balance, because a player that's a really good player in what Ole Miss does is a really bad player in another system. The good players across all systems, they just don't exist. They don't. So it would be important for Pete Golding to nail this hire. When you look at the defense, you know what your defense, you know what your principles are. I guarantee you Pete Golding has a notebook somewhere of what he's looking for and wants to do in an offense. And what Ole Miss has currently, like I said, tempo-wise, slow it down a little bit, go fast a bit. That doesn't really matter. Get to the line of scrimmage, check with me, stuff like that. You can make that offense work with whatever's going on. There's multiple people that do this similar type structure to what Lane Kiffin did. Now, he might not be quite as good, and Lane Kiffin is excellent at creating shot plays. And I always talk about when Ole Miss offense is running really well, the best part about it is it tortures linebackers. So when you look at people that might be candidates for this job moving forward, I think you obviously need to look at John David Baker, the offensive coordinator that's at East Carolina. He has experience of what's going on. The offense looks fairly similar. And East Carolina had a fairly prolific offense with the ability to recruit, I don't know, less than players than what they would get in the Southeastern Conference. That hire would be very interesting for me because that would be an apples to apples hire. Now, the passing game looks a little bit different. They do stuff a little bit different, John David Baker, to what Charlie Weiss did. It would look slightly different, but the operation, the structure, the system would essentially be the same. I think John David Baker would be an excellent fit for Ole Miss to be the primary offensive coordinator moving forward, if that is a guy that Pete Golding would be interested in. Because Pete being the head coach, truly being the head coach, is Pete's call. He gets to decide what is where, but it is my job to speculate. So another name that I'm interested in, and that's partly because Corey Burton, who does Locked On Vandy, is interesting to this. I'm going to bring him in our Everydayers Club, our all access feature that we are going to launch next week. And Corey is going to do stuff to where he does anatomy of a play, to where he breaks down exactly what you're seeing. And he's going to kind of do the stuff that Brooks Austin does a little bit, like once a week, where it's really simple, a bite-sized thing, but it's going to be available only for our paying customers, essentially, once there's a subscription. But Corey is the cousin of Buster Faulkner. They're related. And if you see Corey and see Buster Faulkner, you would say, yeah, they're related. So he has a little bit of an insight of what Buster does and what they did at Georgia and all of the stuff that Buster Faulkner has done. I'm curious to see. Haynes King at Georgia Tech, the offense looks different because passing-wise, Haynes King isn't really that guy. But if he came to Ole Miss and had a Trinidad Chambliss or an Austin Simmons, the offense would look different. But the one thing that Buster Faulkner is really good at doing is scheming up wide receivers, scheming up players, taking advantage and out-leveraging your defense. He kind of comes from the Todd Monken school that called plays, I think, the first national championship for Georgia with Stetson Bennett. He kind of comes from that tree, to where it's a little bit more slow down. It's a little bit more beat you with your brain and beat you with the athletes as opposed to beat you with tempo and things like that. Buster Faulkner would be a very interesting candidate to me, as is John David Baker. Listen, I bring this up because if you're going to be real about it, John David Baker, Buster Faulkner, the next permanent offensive coordinator hire for Ole Miss will be absolutely massive. And if you want me to prove that, before, when Matt Luke went from the interim head coach to the head coach, he retained Wesley McGriff and Phil Longo, which would have been a disaster for Hugh Freeze, but he retained those coaches, and that set his offense back behind a couple of years. And by the time he started to dig out, you ended up with that 2019 season, the piss and the miss, and all of that, and he ended up losing his job over it. This offensive coordinator hire will be absolutely massive for Ole Miss. I don't know if Ole Miss will be able to pull this off, but if they can do it and find the right person, not necessarily a name person, despite what we speculate about, find the right person to do that, to have an offense that is consistent and can be counted on, and you can recruit a quarterback. John David Baker, by the way, recruited Jackson Dart. And all of that will help this player personnel department, which is a very good player personnel department. We will see how it goes. We will see how everything lines up, and we'll see exactly where this Ole Miss offensive coordinator situation is going to be for the playoff and for long term. Those are two different questions, but they both are important questions. So we'll see exactly how that goes for Ole Miss. In our final segment, we look at the coaches that could be wearing red, white, and blue as soon as this staff changes, and it could change a lot. You know, we talked about Buster Faulkner. but we also talk about other candidates that might be worth paying attention to next. You know, the holidays always feel a little easier when you already know the perfect gift, and Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Whether you're treating yourself this season or sending something memorable to family and friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to your door. And this week is the best time to jump in, honestly, because their cyber sale is here and huge deals are on the table. The quality is exactly what you hope for. Incredibly tender steaks, rich flavor, meals that make hosting or weeknight cooking easier. And honestly, it's the kind of gift that brings people together. Save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit Omaha Steaks for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use the promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's Omaha Steaks. Use promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. We talked a little bit at long term about what Pete Golding needs to do with the offensive coordinator position, but what are some names that we might need to pay attention to that might be other positions that come in? Ole Miss is going to be looking for a wide receiver coach, an offensive coordinator, two really big hires, and potentially a tight ends coach as well, and a linebackers coach. You kind of forget about that. With Chris Kiffin heading off, that means that you need a linebackers coach to come in there and handle that as well. What are some names that you might be paying attention to going into this cycle? Pete Golding being at Alabama and the guys that were on that Alabama staff for multiple years, because Nick Saban was a grind and chew you out type of coach. Obviously, that network has grown to the point where Pete Golding probably can get people on the phone of what's going on. And a lot of people like Pete. They just like, he's an affable guy. But the main thing that I'm looking at is Ron Roberts. He is the defensive coordinator at Florida. And what they've been doing defensively, they've been a good defense for most of the year. He was also, Ron Roberts, was Pete Golding's coach in college. So Pete Golding and Ron Roberts have a relationship that goes back probably to his time in Hammond, Louisiana, if we're going to be honest about it. But Ron Roberts coming in, coaching linebackers, the defensive scheme is similar. There's probably some idea changes to go with B. Brown on the back end of the defense. That would be a way with Randall Joyner on the defensive line to make this defense one of the most well-coached units in the entire country. Now, Lou Spano and all the analysts that are around, who knows if they stick around, but if they do, this defense has a chance to be extremely well coached. Ron Roberts has given Lane Kiffin trouble in every location he's been in. He was the coach of Baylor in that Matt Corral injury Sugar Bowl that Baylor won, that Ole Miss couldn't get anything going. Now, a lot of that had to do with Luke Altmaier, but he couldn't get anything going. He was the defensive coordinator in Auburn. Ole Miss won the game, but it wasn't because of anything that Ole Miss did offensively as far as getting over on them. It was about Auburn's offense not being able to get going, as we've seen the last couple of years with Hugh Freeze. Ron Roberts in Florida in 2024 that won the game, had picks at the last of the game. Ron Roberts has given a Lane Kiffin offense a lot of trouble for multiple years at multiple stops with multiple types of players. And with the relationship with Pete Golding, it would almost be a no-brainer. So this is something that I will be watching moving forward. I think that the relationship, like I said, it's just my opinion thing. We'll see what happens. We talked about John David Baker. We talked about John David Baker, offensive coordinator, and how many different ways you could see this offensive coordinator position going. Buster Faulkner as well. We don't know exactly what Pete Golding's ideal look of an offense is. It could be Jim McElwain coming in or something like that. It could be Brian Daboll for all we know. I don't know. But offensively, it's going to be really interesting. Wide receiver, Grant Hurd's out there somewhere. Good wide receiver coach. He's out there somewhere. Maybe bring him back home. You have Dante Moncrief sitting in the recruiting room right now. You have Mike Espy, honestly. I haven't heard that Mike Espy would be interested in doing this or anything, but he runs basically a wide receiver training seminar place in Jackson, Mississippi right now. Appears that John Garrison kind of sticking around a little bit. It'd be interesting to see exactly how that goes. And at tight ends coach, I'm going to be honest about this, okay? At tight ends coach, I think you want a recruiter. You want to find somebody that you can send on the road to do that. Ole Miss had John David Baker way back when. We talked about him from offensive coordinator. He was the passing game coordinator and tight ends coach. So he would help them out, but he wouldn't call plays. That's what I need. Use the tight end position to be like a Swiss Army knife. If you can do that, I think you will be all right. Anyway, thank you very much for putting up with me. I'm exhausted. This is my third show today. And this is tiring. I'm probably going to walk into the recliner after all this is done and go to sleep and get ready for tomorrow's podcast of what's going on. But that's it. Pete Golding, who they hire at offensive coordinator, that is the most important question for the playoff. That is the most important question for 2026. The offensive coordinator position will be absolutely massive. Anyway, thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the front door of Ole Miss. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the show, and it's absolutely free. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy breaks down the best conference in all of the land, from the rivalries to the championship and every game in between. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Howdy toddy, everybody. And I have to come up with a tagline because the Remember Analytics bit, that doesn't play too much anymore. So we'll try and figure out what's going on with that. So we'll talk to you tomorrow. Howdy toddy, everybody.